Welcome back to the Bill and Doug Show. Thanks to you guys for being here, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcast. We would remind you, if you like it, if you're here on any kind of regular basis, or if you're new, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, tell a friend about the Bill and Doug Show. We do a lot of Ohio State stuff, obviously. We also do some national college football stuff. We'll have our playoff bracket show on Tuesday evening. The actual playoff rankings will come out for the first time in a week, Bill. So, like, when we get to the playoff rankings, it's like the last time of us just being theoretical, because it's going to be here a week from now. Isn't that fun?
It is fun. Yeah, it feels like it's like there's like benchmarks in the college football season, and now this has become one of them, right? It sort of like sets you up for the stretch run. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, can't wait to have that Tuesday evening thing that everybody hates and yells at. Boy, oh boy, that's just which I like. It's something.
But isn't
it
fun to yell together? It's fun to yell together.
No, it is. Yeah. I think it's important. I think it's okay. I don't think it takes away from anything, but we will be yelling. But on this show, we're talking about Jim Knowles facing Ohio State. Jim Knowles, the first-year defensive coordinator of the Penn State Nittany Lions after 3 years in Columbus as the defensive coordinator of the Ohio State Buckeyes, helped Ohio State win the national title last year. Two things, Bill, that I think this kind of thing, you go against somebody that you know. It always amps it up a little bit. So one thing is that Ohio State has said that, so we always talk to players at Ohio State on Wednesday evening after practice. And they said that this week, the players who will be made available are the captains. And I always feel like they bring out the captains when we want to make sure nobody says anything we don't want said time. And I'm not sure why they would do that, because Penn State hasn't won a Big Ten game. This is no longer a matchup of two top 5 teams. They, of course, are a rival. That, to me, reads a little bit like, yeah, we're playing this guy who used to coach here. We just want to make sure nobody says anything. Is that your read on that or no?
I think it's definitely part of it. Because defensively, it's like we'll get to talk to Caleb Downs, right? Like, so, yeah,
the smartest man in America.
Yes. So, and he knows how to not create a soundbite, right? Although he is a podcast host now. Caleb, listen, do you want to drum up some? He'll just save his good stuff for his podcast. Who are we kidding? That's
that actually. Don't you think we could relate to Caleb?
Yes,
podcast host to podcast host. What do you really think?
Yeah. No, that's definitely part of it. It's also sort of the big game way of operating. Like we talked to the captains, I think, before Texas. I assume we will talk to the captains before Michigan. If this game were number 1 versus number 3, whatever we thought it might be coming into the year, I think this probably would have been what happened as well. Obviously the game is not that, but I also think Ryan Day, in guarding against any kind of a letdown, wants to create the air of it still being that. So I think that's partly the motivation for talking to the captains. But to your point, I think it is mostly, let's not put anybody out there who might say something off the cuff about Jim Knowles.
Yeah, we have to be realistic about what this game is and isn't. And Ryan Day certainly on Tuesday at his news conference was saying things like, this is still a matchup game. We thought that, and that's what he means when you play like a team that's as talented as you, right? That's his phrase for that. And he's saying that's what we thought before the season, and nothing has changed except the quarterback. And that's true. Like, it's the same players that in the offseason you thought, hey, like Zakee Wheatley, that guy's a problem. Hey, this offensive line, that's a problem. Hey, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen at running back, they're problems. So, like, all those things are true. I think if the opposing defensive coordinator hadn't been in the building at Ohio State for 3 years, we'd be talking regular players this week.
I think that is correct. Yeah, I agree.
And then we asked Ryan Day questions about Jim Knowles on Tuesday. And there were a couple questions about preparing to play a guy who knows you, right? Which makes sense schematically, that kind of thing. There was a question about like hiring. This is his 4th defensive coordinator that he has hired. Ryan Day, and there kind of was like, what did you think of when he left? But I thought I had 2 things I wanted to ask on Tuesday. One of them was about that Ohio State brought the band in during the bye week, which they normally do during Michigan week. And if you tweak anything about your Michigan preparation, like, we are super interested in that. Ryan Day moved senior tackle a couple years ago. They now appear to have moved the hanging out with the band thing from Michigan week. And I was going to ask about that. I'm really interested in that, but I thought we get 3 weeks before the Michigan game to do that. I thought Ryan Day needed to be asked about the emotion of playing Jim Knowles. So that's what I asked, and then we can talk about his answer to it. But that was my my question, and we'll run it right here. You can't really hear my question very well, but it's what how would Ryan Day describe his relationship with Jim Knowles? What is the relationship of Ohio State to Jim Knowles? And like, what are the feelings playing a guy this week? And then I follow up with like, is it any different when a guy leaves, not just for a job, but to go work in the state next door for a Big Ten rival? Here's Ryan Day's answer to all of that.
How would you describe the relationship with Jim Knowles, and how would you describe like this program's relationship with Jim Knowles as you get to go against a guy who's in this building for 3 years?
Yeah, when like any relationship, when it breaks off, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but there really hasn't been much communication. He did a great job when he was here. Helped us win a national championship, and kind of left it at that. And then it was, hey, we got to go make a replacement and move on from there. So, that's kind of how it is. And it was abrupt, but we certainly respect the work that he did when he was here.
Is it any different when he goes down to a Big Ten rival as opposed to some other job?
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, just about how college football and how it's changed, and the money and everything like that. It's just you're seeing some things that maybe we're not used to. But I guess when you look at the NFL, you see more of that than you would in college. But I guess we're getting more like the NFL. So we try not to take those things personal, but we are human.
Aren't we, Bill? Aren't we all human?
We are indeed. Yes.
So I don't like making mountains out of molehills with things that people say. I feel like that has happened a million times over the years, having covered this sport for 20 years. I think it often happens with players, especially in rivalry games, where the littlest piece of sand of like, yeah, we're going to go beat those guys, turns into headlines about player guarantees win. And it's like, well, what do you want the guy to say? And I hate that. I hate when we do that as the media, that like you end up like pinning something on a player that is not at all what he intended to say. What did you think of that answer?
I thought that it showed he was ready for that question. I thought he had a response ready for it, because he wasn't like searching for the right words. I think in the midst of answering that question, which I think you can sense Ryan Day doing sometimes. And I really thought, I noted this to our Substack subscribers, like the punctuation of him, like kind of looking down as he's saying it, but then looking up at the very end and like making what I thought was pretty intense eye contact with you when he said, "We are human." He couldn't help but show a little bit like that is probably about as much emotion as Ryan Day is going to show in a press conference setting like that. But I thought that was a pretty strong tell of like, yeah, this matters. Not that it's surprising, but if there was any doubt as to whether or not that relationship was, I think icy is a word I used when we were talking with our Substack folks the other day. I think that's a fair way to describe it. That it was icy and that it is influencing the mindsets going into this game. I think that was kind of made apparent to us there.
So like last week, as it turns out, when Texas A&M beat LSU, apparently the strength coach at Texas A&M had been the strength coach at LSU. And when Brian Kelly was hired as a head coach at LSU, he did not retain that strength coach. And then that strength coach brought a tackling dummy to practice during the week leading up to LSU with Brian Kelly's face on the tackling dummy.
Oh, I didn't hear that part.
Yeah. And that was just like one guy. That was just like what, like that's a very personal. Yeah. It's not like everybody at Texas A&M like is mad at Brian Kelly. It's just like one guy who now works at Texas A&M is mad that Brian Kelly didn't retain him. But he still did that, and he had all the Texas A&M players tackle Brian Kelly. And then Texas A&M tackled LSU. All the LSU fans left before the game was over, and then Brian Kelly got fired the next day. So like this stuff does happen. I also do not think that every single time you play a team that you used to work for or you used to play for, that it is a revenge game. Because it's like, what are you getting revenge for? This happens in the NFL all the time. There are people who like every single time a guy is playing his former team, it's like, will he get revenge? It's like, he just worked there. Like for instance, I worked at Cleveland.com for 18 years. You worked at Cleveland.com for a very long time. How long did you work at Cleveland.com?
4 years.
I don't want revenge against Cleveland.com. I loved working at Cleveland.com. Like, I don't want to like if we had a show, like, I don't want to like take down. It's just I work there. Now I don't, right? So sometimes this is that. So you could be like, well, Jim Knowles worked at Ohio State. Now he works at Penn State. So I'm giving all these caveats of like, I don't think it's correct to automatically make something like this into something. But I think this is something.
I was gonna say, it's a long wind up to like, this is something, right?
Yeah, it is.
Clearly it's something, but you're not surprised that it's something, right? Knowing like I don't think either one of us would pretend to know either Ryan Day or Jim Knowles on like some kind of deeply personal level, but we know them, and you actually have a pretty good relationship with Ryan Day. We know them well enough to like not be surprised that perhaps their personalities kind of grated against one another from time to time, right? And then clearly it ended in a very strange sort of way, and like a very kind of public way too. When you think about the day of the championship celebration and the news coming out that day that Jim Knowles is leaving for Penn State, like there was probably no way for that to end well once Jim Knowles decided he was going to go to Penn State, but that was up there on the list of ways it could probably like end the worst. So like I get it. I'm not surprised that it's a thing. I guess I was more curious of how much Ryan Day would let us in on the idea or the fact that it is a thing, but then he sort of did. So here we are.
I think he did too.
Yeah.
So you have so there, and I think it's a 3-part thing. As you said, he was prepared for the question. I actually was surprised he sort of didn't get asked it. We don't have to talk about it.
I do think though, you're probably the best one to ask it. I don't know that answer comes out of his mouth if you don't ask it.
I think that's fair. We do have a good relationship, and he knows I'm not trying to get him. But I'm not. It's not a gotcha question. But I think fans are super interested in this. That's a question for the fans because we work for the fans. So like that idea has sort of been asked around it. But it's like, what is the deal with you guys? But I think in the answer, the 3 things that all add up to me to a thing is A, when a relationship ends, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So that's the start of like, because you could just go with like, hey man, like, whatever. People move on as part of it, but sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good for a relationship to end. I'm not saying that this time it was good, that he's saying this time it was good, but he is saying sometimes it is good for a relationship to end. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Second thing, abrupt. It was abrupt. So that's hit like this again was not necessarily like a, hey man, like great, thanks for being here. Good luck with what's next. Like as you acknowledge, it happened on the day, and Bill Rabinowitz covers this in his book Buckeye Brotherhood. And Rabinowitz, you owe me $5 for that. He interviews Jim Knowles in there, and it's clearly, I think most Ohio State fans are aware of this. There's kind of a back and forth in the book. There kind of is, I think, been there out there before. Like Jim Knowles was getting offered more money by Penn State. Ross Bjork, the AD, says we never had a chance to match Penn State, and Jim Knowles says like that's not true. They knew what the offer was, and Jim Knowles, in his mind, the choice was if you stay at Ohio State, it's staying for less money. And then they kind of just like they both make it seem like the other side kind of ended it, which again, even they can't even discuss it and agree on the particulars of what happened, which is what happens when a break, like it doesn't have to go that way. So then like those 2 parts, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, abrupt, and then we're all human, is just like Ryan Day did not have to say that, but that's as far as he's going to go of like, yeah, this means a little something to us. And then, by the way, that's the only thing we're saying about it. Nobody else is allowed to talk about it, but I did crack the door enough for you, every Ohio State fan, to know like, yeah, there's a little something to it this week, which he did not have to do.
Yeah, and we'll talk to him again on Wednesday night, but I also think sort of he doesn't have to say anything else, right? Like he's, like you said, he said all he's going to say. Like elaborate on that. He's not going to elaborate on it. He'll try to elaborate on it with his offense on Saturday, right? He's not going to say any more words, I think, about that until maybe after the game. But there was, like I said, there was a way for him to answer that question that didn't dismiss it, but didn't like whatever drop the veil on the personal aspect of it, and that happened. But But I don't know. I think it's fun. Like, I think let's say season's gone off the rails, right? Like, and we're looking for a way for this game to be interesting. It's like, all right, here we go. Here's something to kind of ponder and roll around in your mind as we get ready to watch Ohio State play Penn State.
Yeah. Subscribe, like, tell a friend about the Bill and Doug Show. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't right now. And by the way, we just want to remind you, like, as you're maybe feeling some of the Ohio State vibes right now, oh, your Buckeye hackles are getting hackled. Roback.com, man, if you really, it's like, man, I want to wear that, like a big Ohio State stripe on a cool quarter zip to the game on Saturday so Jim Knowles knows what's up, right?
While I boo Jim Knowles.
I want to look my best while I rain boos it down upon the defensive coordinator for our national championship team. Go to Roback.com. That's a good, I think actually that's a good advertising thing.
Yeah.
When you boo, you want to look your best.
Mm-hmm.
Roback.com. That's not officially approved by them, but also they can have that for free if they want it. Go to the game day collection, all kinds of good fall stuff there. You'll find something you like. That's the thing. It's like I always say, like, go look at it. I bet you'll find something that you like. RHOBACK.com. And then you do this. BAD20. That gets you 20% off your first order. BAD20, 20% off the first order. This is cool, fun sports stuff. It is not, sometimes there's like real life things that come into play and things. And that's like, man, this is not that. This is just job stuff. But let me outline how I think we maybe got to the point where this did get a little icy and maybe led to Ryan Day saying we're all human. Can I give you the brief, my opinion of the brief synopsis of the Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, Ohio State 3-year experience? Okay.
Yep.
Ohio State's defense is in trouble after 2021. Ryan Day goes to hire the hottest coordinator on the market. That is Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State, who runs a very specific style of defense, and everybody wants to hire him. Ohio State basically wins a bidding war. Jim Knowles is from Pennsylvania. There's not anything drawing him to Ohio other than the opportunity to win a national championship, coach at the highest level, and a bunch of money, right?
Yes.
Which is, frankly, what draws any of us to anything. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Ryan Day,
that initial bidding war, by the way, was against Penn State.
Like among others, but like very much against Penn State, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Penn State wound up with Manny Diaz, which was great. It's just that he got a head coaching job very quickly, and then they went to Tom Allen, and Tom Allen left, and then they went to Jim Knowles. Ryan Day very specifically calls Jim Knowles the head coach of the defense. That's what he's looking for. And Ryan Day and Ohio State know what they're getting with Jim Knowles. They know how Jim Knowles wants to play. And then Jim Knowles gets here and does a lot of the things that he wants to do, safety-driven defense, this jack position, which is like a stand-up edge rusher, but it also butts up against Ohio State traditionally using a 4-man front with Larry Johnson. There's a little consternation there, and the experiment with running the jack as part of the defense really doesn't work. So part of what, like, he's supposed to be the head coach of the defense, but part of what he does and what Ohio State knew he did, he kind of tries to do in year one, and it doesn't work. And then they kind of say, like, you can't do that, basically. Or they decide together, this is not. So the Jim Knowles is already like, well, like, you knew what I was, but you kind of didn't let me go all the way there because you also had this experienced defensive line coach who recruited guys to a certain position, to a way of playing, and then you kind of wanted to stick with. So then they continue into year two. He maybe has overblitzed at times. He backs off a little bit. He's still the head coach of the defense, but he kind of can't, again, get all the way there with what he wants to do. They blitz less. They give up fewer big plays in year two. But probably still, maybe you're not all the way there with what you want to be as a defense. And then in year three, it's like in all this thing, it's hard to learn. It's complex. It's hard to learn. And then in year three, they go to Oregon and they lose and they give up too many points. And the idea is that, like, maybe this defense is too complex. Bill writes about this in his book. The calls were coming in late, and they, after the Oregon loss, like, pared down the defense to some degree, said, hey, you got to get the play calls in faster. And maybe we speculate, a lot of people speculate, did Ryan Day have maybe a little bit more influence on the defense after that? That Jim Knowles, who had been called the head coach of the defense by the head coach the whole time, actually wasn't the head coach of the defense, because the head coach of the team was having more things to say about that. And then all this time, still, Jim Knowles might feel like, you hired me to run defense a certain way and then never let me completely do it. And now you're saying like it's too complex when I wasn't even able to do my whole thing the whole time. And then they win a national championship. He still is a very good defensive coordinator, is recognized as such, is being offered by his home state school this huge raise. And Ohio State, instead of being like, man, we'll match every single dollar you're offered, hedges a little bit. And he's like, you didn't even let me do what I wanted to do. And now I helped you win a national championship and you won't immediately match what I want. I'm out. And Ohio State's thinking, man, like, you were good, but also we kind of had to tweak some of your stuff a little bit. And now you're like trying to like demand something from us when you should be celebrating that you've just reached the peak of your profession by winning a national championship. And I get all of it.
So everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
I think it's just a little bit of a clash of egos that you have to have an ego to be great at what you do. And Jim Knowles has to believe that his way is the best way. And Ryan Day has to believe I'm going to do whatever it takes for this program to succeed. If that means I have to take away a little bit of authority from the defensive coordinator along the way, that so be it. I don't care. And I get it all the way along. But I do think in the end, calling him the head coach of the defense and then not letting him be 100% of what he was probably rubbed Jim Knowles the wrong way, even if Ryan Day was right to do all of it.
Yeah, I think no, I think you're probably on it, right? It never felt like he was totally empowered to do what he wanted to do. Now, I think it's fair to ask, like, should he be? Ryan Day's the head coach, right? Right? Like it's
Completely
not.
agree.
Yeah, right. So I don't think it was necessarily wrong that happened, but I think that did clearly happen. And maybe there was I don't know if there would have been miscommunication along the way of what Jim Knowles was going to be totally in charge of, and then like what he was actually in charge of once he got to Ohio State. I don't know. I don't have any reason to believe that was the case, but certainly it's a possibility. But I do think that's what it came down to. It's like, and it's funny because Jim Knowles leaves Ohio State to go to Penn State, and if you look at Penn State's defense, basically up until James Franklin got fired, was doing a lot of the same stuff that he was doing at the tail end of his Ohio State tenure. And in the first game where he basically didn't have any supervision because there's no head coach at Penn State, you know what he was doing? Oklahoma State stuff.
Oh,
they came out
real?
like they were doing like they came out a 3-3 against Iowa, and it's like, well, I haven't seen that in 4 years from a Jim Knowles defense. So like clearly, Knowles has an idea of how he would prefer to do things. There was always this question, right, of when Knowles was here, is it's it's akin to sometimes you see it in college basketball, but you see it in college football too. You're like, it's a little bit gimmicky, right? And is it that, and it is that way in part to be a talent equalizer when he's at places like Duke and Oklahoma State. It's like, well, you don't have to do all that when you have the more talent than everybody here at a place like Ohio State or even a place like Penn State. And I don't know if Jim Knowles ever came to terms with like where he was before and where he is now, and the marriage between those two things, and how like it can't all be exactly the same. Because what you're being asked is the job description is a little different, and the people you're doing it with are different. So that's on him, I think, right? And I think it was an issue here at Ohio State, and it was an issue at Penn State. Like you hear the same stuff about the defense being confusing, and guys not knowing what they're doing at Penn State, right? It's the exact same stuff. So, and that doesn't mean he's a bad defensive coordinator. I just think it means he has to figure out what he wants to be, and he just never. I mean, he clearly figured it out. Like whatever it was, they got to a good point to win a national championship last year. But I don't know, like if in the end, seeing especially what's happened now at Penn State, if like the fit at like this level of college football is like exactly what Jim Knowles is looking for if he wants to run a lot of the stuff that he wants to run.
It really, to me, is a lot of when you think about the spread offense and when it started out, and like what Kevin Wilson was doing at Northwestern as the offensive coordinator, what Joe Tiller was doing as the head coach at Wyoming and then Purdue, what Rich Rodriguez was doing on the way up, right? Like, and you know much more about this than me, but it's like an underdog offense. Yep. It's an equalizing offense. It's our quarterback maybe isn't quite as tall in a traditional pocket passer. It's maybe our running back isn't quite a thumper, but we're going to get guys in space. We're going to spread you out horizontally. We're going to make the quarterback a run threat to make sure that we're playing 11 on 11 and not being at a disadvantage on offense and all those things. It's an underdog offense that then Urban Meyer adapted and then decided to take to places where you can get the best talent in the country. And now we see, and not only Urban Meyer, but we see the way the spread offense has taken over college football, in a lot of ways football in general. Now people with all the best players were playing that way, right? And so it went from an underdog offense to an everyman offense. And Urban Meyer was huge in that. I think this Jim Knowles defensive scheme is a little bit of that kind of thing. The idea that we're going to play a 3-3-5. We're going to be a safety-driven defense. We're going to have like maybe some of these smaller linebackers making a bunch of plays, right? That if we don't have edge rushers who can just automatically beat tackles and get to the quarterback on their own, we're going to have this jack position floating around and creating confusion. And that obviously he got to this opportunity by doing it at Duke and Oklahoma State. And then to think at Ohio State or Penn State or anywhere where you can get the best defensive players in the country, that can work, I think makes sense. I think it makes sense to hire Jim Knowles. I think it makes sense for Jim Knowles to want to be hired. And it also makes sense for Jim Knowles to want to run the thing that got him to this point. But then I don't think the transition to the top level of talent has been as seamless as it was for the spread offense. Is that?
Yeah, that's probably, I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. You just don't see, you did see Urban show that it's, what was the quote? We did it on,
25-year winter.
25-year winter. And it was like the Northwestern Michigan game when Northwestern beat Michigan and had like 600 yards of offense. And Urban Meyer's quote about that was like, you saw the spread offense work in the Big Ten. And then it's like, I took it to the SEC, and like, of course, in like Urban fashion, it's like, nobody told me it was going to work. It's like, okay, that's
right.
what really happened. But then he did. He ran it with tremendous talent, and it worked. And then you saw that replicated, I think, at other places or versions of it that got high talent. But I don't know that you see a lot of high recruiting defensive programs running this style of defense, right? So yeah, I don't know what the disconnect there is. Maybe there is none, and that we just don't have enough evidence to say that it's one way or the other. But clearly some things needed to be tweaked, and frankly at Ohio State they were, and it worked once they tweaked them, right? But no one likes being told your stuff's not good, do something different. And that's kind of what happened with Jim Knowles. And it's just very funny to me that then we got to the point in the season with Penn State when the season was kind of over and like, who cares what you do? He reverted back to doing the stuff that he likes to do best. So like I thought even that was like sort of instructive about the way things went at Ohio State.
I'm going to read from Bill Rabinowitz's book, but again, this is not saying that you should go buy this book, but Bill, you owe me another $5. Rabinowitz said every time I put the book on screen, he'll give me $5.
Good.
This is from after they lost to Oregon last year. They pared down the defensive playbook significantly from about 25 defensive looks to about 12 to 15, Denzel Burke said. Now, this is a quote from Ty Hamilton, the defensive tackle. I felt like there were a lot of checks that made you think too much while you're on the field. When you're on the field, you want to be locked in. That's Ohio State defensive players in year 3 of the Jim Knowles system after losing to Oregon being like, this is too complicated. This is Terry Smith. I'm just using quotes to back up everything you already said. This is Terry Smith, the interim Penn State head coach. After taking over on the defense, it's complicated. It's very complicated. Where football may have been so easy where players say, I can grasp that. I can grasp that. I can grasp that. Now, all of a sudden you have to study this like education, like going to math class. That's the interim head coach's description of the current defensive coordinator at Penn State. And then James Franklin, before he got fired, said there have been obviously some adjustments to what we're doing on defense, and getting our guys to play confident within the system is still a work in progress. I don't think that's a question. We're not playing as fast, as aggressive as we have in the past on the defensive side of the ball. That's right. That's before he got fired. Yeah, our defense is kind of slowing us down. Then the interim head coach is like, it's like math. Defense is like going to math class. That's exactly what defensive players want to do. Hey, you guys want to run around and violently tackle people with the ball? It's like, no, man. I want to do algebra. What are we doing? But it's the exact same thing. And it's more your fault for hiring him because Jim Knowles is Jim Knowles. And so for him to be successful a certain way and then for you to bring him in and be like, oh God, what are you doing? I think it's more on you. No?
Yeah. No. Yeah. And like, listen, this was not it was not discussed at the time, right? And it's easy to relitigate it now that James Franklin has been fired and Penn State's defense has struggled the way it has in some of the things that have been said. But clearly there's something to the idea of it just takes a really long time for this defense to get to where it needs to be. It took 3 years at Ohio State. It took 4 years at Oklahoma State. And like the idea that Jim Knowles was just going to show up at Penn State and everything was going to be fine was short-sighted. And in another universe, would have been a good hire probably still for Penn State, but Penn State was in a 1-year championship window and didn't have the time for this defense to kind of take root the way that it needs to. So that's a separate conversation about maybe James Franklin being a little too blinded by Ohio State. But yeah, it just wasn't the right guy for the right time. I think Jim Knowles was the right guy for the right time at Ohio State.
Yes, because they were desperate.
Not at Penn State.
And Jim Knowles was more like a savior when it came to Ohio State because their defense was having real issues after 2021, whereas Tom Allen wasn't fired at Penn State as the defensive coordinator. He left. He left to go be the Clemson defensive coordinator. Manny Diaz hadn't been fired as the defensive coordinator. He left to be the Duke head coach before that. Like, they liked what they were doing. And I think they would have kept Manny Diaz or Tom Allen if they could, and they didn't have that choice. And then when you had to do something else, you went and hired a guy who was still perceived as, and again, like rightly so, as maybe the best defensive coordinator on the market. But it's possible that like what actually brought out the best of a Jim Knowles defense in 2024 in the second half of that season and in the college football playoff was you de-Knowlesified it a little bit. And that's what brought about the peak performance of that defense. But then when you hire him, how can you hire him and de-Knowlesify it? And so it's like it is a very complicated process. And I don't know that anybody's at fault. And as we, again, continue to think about this as like Jim Knowles coming back to face this Ohio State team, I think it is all very, and it goes back to the word that Ryan Day used, which is human. It's all very human. But also, I think the relationships of all of this are just as complicated as the scheme, and that they are all, it all feels like math class. It's all very complicated. And that makes it super interesting. But I'm pretty sure like Ohio State fans, if they get an opportunity, are kind of going to boo Jim Knowles. And I just think there probably are some hard feelings all the way around, not by anyone's fault, but it's just the way things shook out.
Yeah, no, I think I don't anticipate the reception being particularly warm. And it's primarily a byproduct of how it ended and where he went, but also too, I think the notion, and I don't think it's an entirely off base one. It's like, yes, you had the best defense in the country last year and you won a national championship, but now it is sort of painted in the light of, well, that happened like after some responsibility, and maybe that's the wrong word, but like some of the influence was like kind of taken away from you, right? Like how much of that was you? And I even thought it was interesting on Tuesday when Ryan Day was like sort of asked to compare, I think by Bill Rabinowitz, like kind of compare like Matt Patricia and Jim Knowles, and Ryan Day said like Jim was great here, Matt's doing a great job here, but the common denominator is like the rest of our defensive staff and the players, right? Like, so it's not even in that, it felt like Ryan Day, and I think like trying to compliment Matt Patricia in some way ended up kind of taking away even further from what Jim Knowles accomplished here by reminding people that he has really good defensive assistants and obviously had tremendous defensive talent. So yeah, complicated is the right word. I think fun and interesting on some level, is like it doesn't. I don't think anything's like nothing has like crossed the line. I think in terms of like how people reacted to this, and I don't anticipate that happening on Saturday. But it is quite the layer to add to this game, and it was going to be this way anyway. Like, but it has just been pushed to the forefront now because this is not a game between two teams who are going to be playing in the college football playoffs. So this is sort of like all we have to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting because Ryan Day even said like he's sort of that Tim Walton and James Laurinaitis and Larry Johnson and Matt Guerreri like probably don't get enough credit for all the things they do defensively. Like almost sort of, he didn't say like you guys, but he could have, like meeting the media, that like we are, and fairly so, we are focused on like the coordinators and the people in charge, but that it's not only about, oh, Jim Knowles did this and that Matt Patricia's doing this, that like, and that again, we've said many times, and Ryan Day has said many times, his hiring of Matt Patricia was partially predicated on finding a defensive coordinator who would keep those existing 4 coaches. Matt Patricia didn't bring his guys because Ryan Day really wants to make sure that people understand how good those 4 defensive coaches are, how much they have done for the program under 2 different coordinators, and he thinks they should get more credit. So like that idea of this too, and the idea again that Matt Guerrieri came to Ohio State as Jim Knowles' right-hand man. Like Jim Knowles is his mentor, and now Knowles is gone, and now there's like a little bit of but Guerrieri's wearing Buckeye clothes, man. He didn't follow. I'm sure if he wanted, Jim Knowles would have taken Matt Guerrieri to State College. I don't have any doubt about that, right? If Matt Guerrieri wanted to go.
Yeah, but that's the other thing about Knowles going to Penn State is like Knowles didn't really. I think Knowles might have taken some like QC guys with him, but the position coaches at Penn State, I think, were mostly unchanged, if not entirely unchanged too, right? So it's not a dissimilar situation.
Just it's interesting. Ryan Day also said we know he'll have some curveballs, as he always does, about Jim Knowles. Asked about sort of this schematic thing of when you know somebody intimately, that this style of Ohio State offense and the Jim Knowles style of defense went against each other in practice every day, 1s versus 1s for 3 years. And then Ryan Day's answer to that was kind of, I think you can get wrapped up too much in that kind of thing. It really comes down to fundamentals. I don't know if I believe that.
No, I almost feel like Ryan Day needs to go back over like the notes, because I think he's a pretty meticulous note taker. The notes from like every defensive staff meeting that he was a part of over the last 3 years, and all the things that were pitched and he said no to. That's what's going to be. That's what's going to be on the field on Saturday. Yeah. Jim Knowles like, what do you think of this? Huh? How about this? Remember he said I couldn't do this? How do you feel about it now? And Ryan Day's like, touchdown, Jeremiah Smith. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah,
but yeah, it matters. I think it matters. Yeah.
And it is one of those things, just looking at like Matt Patricia, if we talked about like this defensive staff, this defensive coordinator, this defensive style, these intelligent defensive players, they aren't like causing a million turnovers. They aren't getting, crazy pressure on every single play, but their success rate is excellent. Second in the Big Ten behind Indiana. They do their job on a down-to-down basis, and they make it very hard for an opposing offense to drive down the field methodically, and they don't give up big plays. Jim Knowles was much more boomer bust. Jim Knowles wanted to blitz you and create big plays. A havoc rate is one way that you can judge that, but like what's happening at Penn State is that like they kind of don't have either, that they're actually down in tackles for loss and that kind of thing, but they also are not very good in the down-to-down, do-your-job style of defense, and that can be like a very difficult spot that it just is a little bit more boom or bust. But like for right now, as you think about it, Ohio State's defense is allowing a 21.4% conversion rate on 3rd down for opponents. That's the best in the country, right? Mm-hmm. Penn State is allowing a 40% conversion rate on 4th down. That's 81st in the country. And they've created the same number of turnovers, Ohio State and Penn State defensively. And Penn State was like a tackles for loss monster last year. It's like Abdul Carter's part of that, but they really got after you, and they just kind of maybe to the same extent aren't getting after you in the same way. Last year, they averaged 7.44 tackles for loss per game. Penn State did. That was 9th in the country. This year it's 6.14. That's 41st. So like Ohio State's just doing their job every play and making you march. And then Jim Knowles and Penn State, like they kind of aren't all the way there on the big time plays, but then they aren't there on doing your job every down. And they're really kind of caught in between. They're kind of giving up a decent number of big plays. Like it's not it hasn't coalesced, and you can tell.
The one thing I did notice, I'm looking at it now too, in Knowles' first year, and like Ohio State fans know this, so I'm sorry to make you relive it. Ohio State allowed 18 plays of 40 yards or more in 13 games in 2022. It's like more than 1 per game, which is kind of insane. Penn State this year has only allowed 3 in 7 games. So like they're not giving up the like back-breaking giant hits that Ohio State was giving up, like even to bad teams in Jim Knowles' first year. But yeah, they are a little soft on defense still, especially when it comes to converting on 3rd down.
Yeah. So that's where we are. It's just kind of I was interested in how Ohio State would talk about this, and Ryan Day gave you just enough to let you know that there'll be a little bit of a thing, and then I would not be surprised if post game maybe a couple players say some stuff of like, we really wanted to show them, or we wanted, like not even like in a like take that Jim Knowles kind of way, but like that I think players will admit that they were a little extra motivated, whether it's defensive players saying like, yeah, like that guy, or whether it's offensive players saying we want to show that, this style of offense can't be stopped by any defense, even one that knows us so well or whatever. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to overdo it, but I just think it means something to these guys, to these Buckeyes.
I think it does. And I don't know, from the player perspective, like I think I said this before, like they understand it's the nature of the business, and I don't think you can be too sentimental about anything. And I think by and large, Jim Knowles had pretty good relationships with his players.
Yes,
but not the tightest ones. Like even Peyton Pierce a couple weeks ago was talking about Matt Patricia, and he said like, now Peyton Pierce wasn't a starter last year, but I think he said that he talked more with Matt Patricia, like in Matt Patricia's first week on campus, than he did with Jim Knowles, like all of last season, right? So I do think there's a difference. While Jim Knowles' player relationships were not like poor or like antagonistic or anything like that, I do think there's a different connection with Matt Patricia that might bring out something from the players if asked about it after the game.
And I will say the last thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the criticisms after the regular season loss for Ohio State last year was Nick Saban basically said their defensive structure was antiquated or kind of stale or whatever it was, that you can't just run a 4-man front. That's not sophisticated enough. And I'm sure Jim Knowles was like, yeah, I know. That's why I want to run stuff that's not just a 4-man front. And Ohio State kind of had demanded that they run a 4-man front. And now Jim Knowles is gone and Matt Patricia is doing all kinds of stuff with different looks with the front. And it's like, oh yeah, Larry Johnson's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, we're good. We'll figure it out along the way. And Ryan Day, like on Tuesday, was saying, it's been an adjustment for Larry Johnson to do things a different way. And it's not an adjustment that they ever really made while Jim Knowles was here and wanted to do it. Now, they had Jack Sawyer, they had JT Tuimoloau, they had certain guys that were recruited to a certain kind of thing. I don't think it's only coach related, but I bet you that makes Jim Knowles tear his hair out. Maybe.
Yeah, I think it could. But also, like, Ohio State gets into these 5-man fronts a lot of times because they can put Arvell Reese on the line of scrimmage and they're comfortable playing Peyton Pierce as a sophomore at middle linebacker. It's like Jim Knowles didn't play young players. He didn't. Like,
and that's been an issue at Penn State this year, right?
Yeah, so it's like Cody Simon, Tommy Eichenberg, Steele Chambers didn't come off the field, right? So like you had Arvell Reese at your disposal last year, but you don't play young players. So like I don't like, is that on Jim Knowles? I don't know. Maybe I'm taking it too far, but I think there's a more of an open-mindedness personnel wise with this defensive staff than there was the last couple of years too.
Yeah. Would Arvell Reese have been a good jack? I mean, is that what he is right now? I don't know. I don't even know what a jack is.
He's a really good pass rusher. I know that much.
Yeah, he's a good player. Anyway, okay. So anyway, like if you're an Ohio State fan who like wants to be like, oh, Jim Knowles, I think you have permission to. I think like Ryan Day just gave you enough of an opening to be like, yeah, it's enough of a thing that you're not making it up.
Yeah, I think so.
That's fair. Like, subscribe, tell a friend. We have a playoff show Tuesday night. We'll have a big show for our Substack subscribers on Wednesday about the Ohio State-Penn State rivalry. We will have a visit from Audrey Snyder, great Penn State writer from the Nittany Dispatch podcast, who will join us, and that will go up on YouTube feeds and podcast feeds here sometime Wednesday late afternoon, probably, Bill. Does that sound right?
Yes, Wednesday. Yeah, late afternoon. Yep.
And then Ohio State picks on Thursday, national picks on Friday. And then we would love to have you guys join us for our post-game show on Saturday. Traditionally, our Ohio State post-game shows have been right when the Ohio State game ends. That will not be the case this week because both Bill and I are going to the game in Ohio Stadium. So I think our plan, Bill, is we're going to do like a late night after the games are over 11 p.m. show. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or do you think we're doing?
Yeah, I think we're going to do.
Oh, yeah.
Or yeah.
Did we say we were going to do like an Ohio State postgame show when we get back from the stadium and then do like a national show at night? Maybe that's what we said.
I think that was the plan. Yes.
I probably should have cleared this with the chief content officer before I said it live on the air.
We can figure it out on the pod. It's fine.
All right. So that means you have to listen to another show this week to get the actual plan on what's going to happen on Saturday. So it's just a good tease to make you guys stick with us. But we know that you do, and we're so appreciative of that. Thank you for being here. As always, I got a bunch more stuff coming this week here on YouTube, here on the podcast feeds, on Substack, Bill and Doug, osu.substack.com. But for now, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the Bill and Doug Show.